Let's go ahead and bring on our last two guests. Steve Okun, of course, our regular contributor on our International News Review. At that time, the former Deputy General Counsel and Aviation Advisor in the U.S. Department of Transportation, Washington, D.C. And Kris Balderston, the former Deputy Chief of Staff for then U.S. Senator Hillary Clinton, and now the National Political Director at Change Research. Kris, good morning first to both of you. Kris, let me start with you. You were also the legislative director at that time for Hillary Clinton, the U.S. Senator from New York. At that moment, were you already starting to think, okay, look, how can we get some federal funding and help Lower Manhattan recover from this, or at least get through it?
Yeah, on the way in from my home in Alexandria, I passed the Pentagon and heard about the first flight. We got to the Capitol, where we worked in the Russell Building. Senator Clinton had not yet arrived yet. We heard about the first crash, and luckily she has Secret Service protection. So after the second one hit, the Secret Service informed me and told me to evacuate our staff. We left the Russell Building, and I met Hillary on the way in. Secret Service put her in the car, and we headed to a staff member's townhouse on Capitol Hill, where we had our own little room where we could strategize. These were our constituents that had been hit in New York City. We couldn't get her or Senator Schumer up to, now the majority leader, up to the city. So we really were spending our time, like everyone else, looking at what was happening here. I would note, when Jerry was talking about the medical, the EMS, I always remember being in this townhouse with Secretary Clinton and very presciently said, these workers need masks. She immediately recognized that we were not prepared, and people were going to have ill health for a number of years. And subsequently, she and Schumer came out with, the medical care assistance that would later happen. And also, within days, started the whole rebuilding Lower Manhattan. We would later go to President Bush for a $20 billion program for immediate funding. So you immediately kicked in, but we had two very antsy New York senators who wanted to get back, but everything was closed. The tunnels,
Sure.
Planes, the trains, everything.
Couldn't get there if you wanted to.
Couldn't get there if you wanted to.
Well, that's a good point to bring in Steve here. Watching the documentaries this week, Steve, President Bush was in the air having that same discussion with his officials. I want to land. I want to be seen. I want to go back to the White House. And his security personnel were telling him that's not safe at the moment. As someone who was in Capitol Hill that day, what are your thoughts looking back on the key political figures on the day and in subsequent days, whether it's President Bush, Senator Clinton of New York, or even Mayor Giuliani? Looking back, what are your thoughts on the way the key political figures responded?
Well, when that first plane hit, and as you said, Neil, I was in my office on Capitol Hill, my thought was, well, is this a terror attack or is this some type of tragic accident? In my time at DOT, I had worked on aviation safety and security. It worked on every major aviation disaster. And I remember after TWA 800 in 1996, everybody said, oh, this was a missile that took out the aircraft. And it wasn't. Obviously, it was a mechanical design failure that ended up causing the plane to explode over Long Island Sound. And so that was my thought. Which way is this going to go? We were always worried, as the U.S. government, about a terror attack on airlines. There was something in 1995 called the Bojinka plot, where they were ISIS was going to blow up 11 aircraft headed from Asia to the United States. So we were always worried about bombs on aircraft. How do you keep the bombs off the aircraft? Then the second plane hits the tower, and then obviously it's not an accident. Then the third plane hits the Pentagon about half an hour later. And then those of us certainly on Capitol Hill or at the White House are going, are we next?
Sure.
And if that plane is going to attack the Capitol from the north to the south, it's going to, I'm likely going to die. People like Kris are likely going to die. What's going to happen? So the whole country, Neil, came together after 9/11. It was really remarkable to see, as you mentioned, Senator Clinton, Senator Schumer, two Democrats, Rudy Giuliani, a Republican, George Bush, a Republican. Partisanship went out. We all came together. How do we rebuild New York? How do we take care of the first responders? How do we address the new threats we have in aviation security? Everything was bipartisan, and it's something that you look back on with making you proud as an American, and it also makes you wistful when you see what's happening today with our politics.
Steve, you had also done a lot of work on the legislative side, looking at air traffic safety. You had done things at the DOT and the Clinton administration. Just give us a couple of data points on that process, and I know and what that led to.
Well, I'll give you one, and then I'm going to turn over to Kris. He and I worked in the administration together, and then he saw all this through on the Hill after I had left government. Right. But one of the things we were always worried about at DOT was the screeners at airports. I mean, these were the lowest paid employees at the airports. They were making minimum wage.
And this is pre-TSA.
Of course, pre-9/11.
Yeah,
we knew this was a problem. You would get a job as a screener at an airport, hoping you would then get a job at the McDonald's in the airport because it paid more. And this was an entry position into employment at an airport. So we all knew this was going to change, but it was too expensive. No one would ever do anything about it. 9/11 forced that change. It forced the creation of TSA. It forced federal employees to be airport screeners. We are so much safer now. Not 100%. We are so much safer now because of that. That's one little change, and Kris can talk about a whole lot more that happened legislatively.
Yeah, Kris, to you on that front.
Yeah. I mean, well, our first concern was getting New York back in shape, and Lower Manhattan and the workers, and move very quickly. And as Stephen says, I'm wistful at the times when we were bipartisan. Very symbolically that afternoon, as we all gathered at the Capitol Police Department, Republicans and Democrats together, strategizing and deciding symbolically that we were going to go to the front of the Capitol and sing "God Bless America" together. It sounds corny now, but it was a very, very emotional moment where you had House, Senate, Republican, Democrat, and citizens from the neighborhood coming over and singing in front of the Capitol. It's something very worrisome when you start comparing it to recent events at the Capitol.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be the key of that day, doesn't it? The lack of bipartisanship went out of the window.
Kris Balderston, how about you? What is a quick legacy that we've got that we should focus on going forward?
The first thing I would say is this is a day where a lot of your old friends come together. I will always remember, as the previous guest said, the families of a lot of the 9/11 victims came to Washington to really promote change. And that's something, we're still friends 20 years later. It's something that will last a long time. I sent to Stephen, as you know, part of my job is a political director for a polling firm, Change Research. And I do think that we did a poll on this, and there are very many generational trends here. I think it's going to be a very long time before young Americans put people on foreign soil again. That came out very, very clearly in the polling that we did in the last week.
And Steve, Steve, the final word.
Two things. One, Bennett's, your super intern, Bennett's first birthday was 3 days after 9/11. And, we were questioning whether or not to go forward with the birthday party. And, we were in Northwest Washington, and we decided, we have to do this. It's important that we don't let the terrorists win, that we go forward and that we live our lives, and that we have a future generation coming, that we have to, make the world a better place. And so I think that spirit is still there. But on the other side, and I'm so moved by the seven of us here, but right now the United States is going through a 9/11 every 2 days, 3,000 COVID deaths every 2 days in the United States. It's a 9/11 every 2 days. Maybe, just maybe, the spirit that we have here is going to help us go forward to address this problem that we face.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. That is a poignant reminder as well. Hey, we have to thank all of you for coming on today. Major General Tim Green, Melinda Murphy, Captain Jerry Gelbard, Steve Okun, Kris Balderston, our dream team, our all-stars, remembering September 11th, 20 years later. We really appreciate all of your time. There's lots of comments in our Facebook live chat. If you can all stick around and maybe add to some of those comments or answer some of those questions, we'd appreciate that. But thanks to all of you for coming on today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Excellent, Neil.
Wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
Wonderful stuff.